Hello everyone, happy Monday and good morning. Now, before I start this next video, I just want to give you some background on what to expect in this next video. In this video, I carry out an interview with my good friend, Comrade Rice. He's an up-and-coming YouTuber whose moniker is really Comrade Rice, but his name is Ken. And he's an American chap who is renouncing his American citizenship soon, right? And he's part of the American socialist circle. So, as you know, the working men of the world have no country, and so socialists ought to be forming links and relations with socialists all over the world, because as I've said, you have far more in common with a working class person of a different race and even a different culture than you do with a capitalist of your own race and culture, right? So basically in this video we discuss a certain insecurity in the diaspora, the diaspora that always seems to be going around trying to police other members of the diaspora. For example, some of the Malaysian Chinese diaspora, the more right-wing types who are more nationalistic to China, may call me a self-hating banana because, well, I've no emotional connection to China. Well, why should I be reasonably expected to have any emotional connection to China? My ancestors came here 300, 400, or even 500 years ago, right? I'm a Peranakan. Well, my sailorman ancestor came here a few hundred years ago. I'm one of the first wave of migrants. I'm from the first wave of migrants to the Malay Peninsula. So naturally, I consider Malaysia to be my ancestral land. Now, do I have anything against China? Of course not. But it's about as irrelevant to me as, or I shouldn't say irrelevant, no. Of course, I visited China once, but, well, I feel about China the same way I feel about Italy or Nigeria, I've no known roots in China. I've had no interest in learning Mandarin because Mandarin is not relevant to my life. It's not really my mother tongue, which is Malay, and I get hated for it because I look Chinese, but I have no interest in learning Chinese. And yes, the same thing happens with people like Ken, who get called an Oreo because he doesn't act black, so to speak, right? Although, quite frankly, the very same people who call him an Oreo would themselves be called whitewashed if they were to go back to a traditional African tribe. And, you see what I mean. Anyway, I've incurred a lot of hatred from the Asian American community for saying that, well, I've no interest in learning any form of Chinese whatsoever, and any more than I have in learning Italian or Greek or Spanish, right? Oh, I've had so much hatred from that community because they think I'm some kind of a whitewashed, self-hating banana. Well, if they had any knowledge of what a Peranakan was, they would probably, it'd probably do them good to learn that there is more to Asian identity than just Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. We Southeast Asians are also Asian. Not that they'd be aware of that fact, but I've incurred the hatred of quite a number of the more vocal and radical elements of the Asian American community, like Douglas Kim, for example, who went on a hate crusade against me on Twitter before Elon Musk kicked me off Twitter for basically hurting his capitalist feelings. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin this interview. I'm so excited to show you this interview. So, let's begin. So in this topic, we discuss why it is impossible for the diaspora to return home to their motherland, even though, believe it or not, there are some in the Western, particularly Asian American diaspora, who consider themselves to be more Asian than Asians in Asia. Like they look at Malaysian Chinese bananas or coconuts, Indians who don't speak Tamil or Hindi, or langsats, Malays who don't speak Malay, and they think that they are more Asian than these people, right? Because they happen to speak an Asian language that was passed down to them from their migrant parents. But the sad reality is, no, if you did not grow up in Asia, you cannot call yourself more Asian than someone who grew up in Asia. And I'm sorry, this is going to be a this is a very painful truth you have to swallow, but you are culturally Western, right? You're culturally American, and no matter how whitewashed you call us, even the bananas who grew up in Asia and do not speak a word of an Asian language, who went to international school since day one, you cannot call yourself more Asian than they are. Because if you guys came back to Asia, you would still stick out more than the bananas would, or the langsats or the coconuts, because we understand the social norms of this country or this region or whichever region we come from better than you do. I'm sorry. Whether even a banana from Hong Kong understands Eastern social norms better than you do, right? These people who call the other members of the diaspora whitewashed, or who call other Asians whitewashed, are usually very, very westernized themselves, which is a great irony. So without further ado, let's begin. Hello everyone, welcome back to the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Hope you're having an amazing day. We're at my studio where I do my videos and my editing. I don't actually do it at home. So, do you like my studio setup, people? Do you like it? Okay, everyone. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Ken. Now, Ken is a good friend of mine, although we've never actually met face to face, but we will when he comes to KL in about 3 weeks. So, without further ado, Ken, would you mind introducing yourself to us and telling us why exactly you like traveling so much? Maybe that's not a very good question. Okay, just tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, okay, I'll start off. So, I'm originally from Bronx, New York, and grew up there my whole life, lived there my whole life. And we have a lot of problems culturally in America, as well as politically, and so on and so forth. And it's very toxic for the average person who doesn't fall in line with the typical mindset of the people there. So I decided that I wanted to travel out to Asia. First place was Japan, then I went to China, then I went to other countries in Central Asia. And then it dawned on me that, you know, for me, myself, I'm not the problem in terms of like how life is in the US, it's the culture itself. So I just left entirely and decided that I want to travel to other countries in Asia, because it turns out I have more in common with the people of Asia than in America, Europe, Africa, and all these other countries. So now that I've spoken to a lot of people, there's a lot of common, issues that they have that we also share as working class people than the upper class people, I should say. So for me, traveling in Asia, it's like it's wonderful for me because I learn a lot about myself. I learn a lot about people and how much we have in common and how much there is to learn from each other. And we're not so much different, and we should come together as one rather than trying to keep ourselves divided and hating each other and letting the capitalists dictate how we should live and our lives and so on.
How we should conduct ourselves and live.
Yeah.
Well, you know what drew us together, Ken, is that you are among the you're from the American socialist circles, and I'm from the Malaysian socialist circles. So socialism is partly what drew us both together as friends, because, you know, we believe that every person has the right to dignity, self-respect, and of course, a civilized standard of living. That's at least the bare minimum that every person should be entitled to, right? Now, of course, some of your countrymen don't seem to share this view. Yeah, so, you know, remember we said about, you know, how we have so much more in common with a working class person of a different race, even a different culture, than we do with capitalists of our own race and culture. Now,
Mhm.
you know, America seems to be a very, very tribalistic society. And, you know, some of your compatriots, some of your Asian American compatriots have called me a self-hating, whitewashed cuck, in the words of Douglas Kim, because I can't speak Chinese. Why would I reasonably be expected to speak Chinese? I'm Peranakan, right? So I
Yeah.
look Chinese, but my mother tongue is Malay. And I've been here for like 400-500 years, so I don't feel attached to China in the same way some first generation Chinese Americans do. What is it about this racial tribalism in America which stipulates that if you are of this race, that means your complete and utter loyalty must be to this race? Like if you should prefer to side with a Chinese capitalist over a Malay or Indian working class person. Can you give me some insight into this?
First, I need to say this because I made this term called Afro Saxon. Afro Saxon
A nice
is
guy called Zio. Sorry to interrupt. I
Afro
don't
Saxon
think
because well, in America we say black, white, whatever, right? But Afro Saxons are the people who I term are the former African slaves in the US. I call them Afro Saxons. And then you have the actual Africans from Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, wherever, right? So growing up, I had this exact same problem with other Afro Saxons. They say you talk white, you dress too too nice. Well, they call me self-hating, you Oreo, you this, you that. It's exactly the same thing, what you're going through. So my opinion is because these Asian Americans and these, well, Asian Saxons and Afro Saxons, they, in their hearts, in their minds, in their culture, their cultural DNA is they're Americans. They're not from China, they're not from Ghana, they're not from any of those. They still retain Anglo-Saxon mentality. It's just they have a little bit of flavor, like Afro flavor, Asian flavor, you know, Hispanic flavor, or whatever. And they want to fit in American society, but they can't because we have such, like you said, a tribalistic mentality. This group with that group, this group. And because they feel insecure about it, they want to include as many people as possible to be accepted throughout the mainstream society. This is what I think.
And then Liberia is also an interesting case study, right? When the former house slaves were sent back to colonize Liberia. Now, it was hoped that they would just assimilate into the region and simply, you know, become one with the people, and then the whites would be rid of them, right? But the thing is, what happened in Liberia? I mean, that's sort of like a disaster of diaspora returning to the motherland, right? I mean, it's a
see, the problem is similarly to what you told me before, how you have these Chinese nationalists or these Asian American nationalists.
Oh, we have a lot of them in Malaysia. Yeah, we have a lot of
because you look Chinese. Even you could be Mongolian Chinese, you could be another nationality. Because you look Chinese, you should just learn Chinese Mandarin like them.
Right.
Like that. And it's the same thing here. You have a lot of Afro nationalists because I have the Afro appearance. I should just be one with Africa. I should go to Nigeria, Ghana, etc., etc. And they think just because we're of the same skin color, automatically we're magically exactly the same thing, and magically we're going to speak whatever language they speak. We're going to automatically worship whatever gods they worship. It's not the case.
No.
So in the case of Liberia, they must have assumed the same thing, that if they go to Liberia, yeah, they're going to assimilate like it's nothing. Problem was, these former slaves, they're Americans. They're essentially Europeans, culturally, mentally, because that's how they were raised. They learn English, blah blah blah. So, plus they're not from ancestrally. They're not from Liberia. They're more in, like, I guess they said, some of them said Nigeria, Ghana. They're from that area. So when they came to Liberia, they realized, whoa, this is so different. These people are nothing like us. They have different ways of life. They worship different gods. Their way of life is just so alien to their own. And these Afro Saxons, these former slaves, they have no connections at all. They don't have family there. They don't know anything about Africa. So when they go there, they're saying, no way, we're not, we can't, we want nothing to do with them. So they started forming their own kind of like states.
Cliques, if you will.
Yeah, like cliques.
Yes.
And because they have the knowledge and the mentality, the colonialist mentality of their former masters, they did the same thing to the locals.
And you predict that Asian Americans, if they were to return to the motherland, because they would do the same thing, right? They would consider themselves like, oh, we're the model minority in America, so therefore we're also superior to local Asians who could not cut it in America. Is that how they would?
That's what I think. I think anybody who is from America or anywhere in the West that is culturally, mentally Western, or in this case American, they're going to do the same thing wherever they go.
Just like
just like in Liberia, because the reason why I feel so is because these Americans who come to their ancestral land, so for example, Douglas Kim, he's Korean American. He doesn't, I don't know, I've never seen him speak Korean.
I don't think he does. So it's really rich of him to shame me for not speaking Chinese. And I do speak Malay, so
yeah. I don't see him talk about any of the Korean holidays or any of their ancestral cultural things.
And he talks about white male Asian female, or white male Asian female mind virus.
Mind virus, yeah. And has he ever been to Korea? Do you know?
Doubt it. No, I don't think he has.
So how can you say that I'm Korean or I'm Nigerian, but I've never been to Nigeria before?
Well,
how can you say you're whatever you are, but you've never been to that place? You don't speak the country, the language of that country. You don't have relatives or friends there. You can't say that.
He has been to Singapore before. That's
Singapore.
You can say he's been to Asia, Singapore.
But it's kind of like, how can you say to someone else, be proud of your heritage, learn this language, but you don't do it either? What's the difference?
Hypocritical, I know, and I don't think he's ever going to go back and live in Korea. That's the thing.
Yeah. So I think if there were a group of Douglas Kims that came together and said, okay, we're going to go to, I don't know, let's say they go to Malaysia for some reason. They never go to their actual ancestral land. They go to another place for some reason.
Oh,
they'll go there.
Yeah, you remember Captain Cool saying that if I go back to China, my relatives will look at me as a failure, so I can't go back. That's what he said. Yeah, so he will.
Well, let me digress a little bit. You know how there are some even Anglo-Saxons in America that say, I'm German, I'm Italian, I'm Irish. They say like I'm whatever they are from. But when they actually go out to those places, or when they go to travel, they go to the poorest part of that continent. They usually go to Eastern Europe, or they go to Southeast Asia or some other place. They never go to that actual, if they do go to their home countries, it's usually like to visit their family or something. But they usually not, it seems to me they usually go to the poorer parts, the poorer European parts or whatever. So when they go there, they're going to have their own cliques, their own bubble. Like you said, the Bangsar bubble.
Bangsar bubble, that's correct.
Bangsar bubble. In Kazakhstan, it's I think it's called Medial. It's like the Medial area. It's the rich part of Almaty, Kazakhstan. And that's where all the rich Kazakhs live, the rich Russians live, and you'll find a lot of expatriates there. And they have their own bubble, so they make their own business. They keep their networks and connections to themselves, and eventually they'll try to expand, and then you're going to see what we see in Israel.
Gentrific. Yeah. Speaking of Israel, you mentioned the term Afro Saxon, and I came up with the term Zio-Saxon, right? This chap, this chap that I'm sure you see this chap over here, Theodor Herzl, this guy. He was the guy who proposed the idea of Zionism, which means the Jewish people, the Jewish diaspora in the world ought to return to Palestine, the so-called motherland, even though they have no historic connection to Palestine, right? They were in essence European because they'd been European for hundreds of years, and they had already intermarried with European people and absorbed European culture. They were they had some Jewish ancestry, but they had a legitimate claim that, I mean, not legitimate claim to land, sorry, let me rephrase that. They had legitimate grievances because Jewish people were treated horribly in Europe, especially. They were treated better in the Muslim world, but in Europe they were treated horribly. So his proposal was that the Jewish people ought to return to Palestine. But the problem is, if this is also what Herzl says, just give me a moment here. I will look up that quote. Herzl, Rampart against Asia. There we are. Okay, right. This is what Theodor Herzl says, right? Okay. No, where is it? Here it is. Palestine is our ever memorable historical home. The very name of Palestine would attract our people with a force of marvelous potency. If His Majesty the Sultan of Turkey were to give us Palestine, we could in return undertake to regulate the whole finances of Turkey. Okay, this is the kicker. We should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. We should, as a neutral state, remain in contact with all Europe, which would have to guarantee our existence. There you go. So, as you can see, Herzl comes back not as a Jewish person, I mean, well, as a Jewish person, but a Jewish person of Europe, an Anglo-Saxon Jewish person. Does that make sense? So how has this, like we've seen with Liberia, do you think this has contributed to the disaster in Israel and Palestine that we see today?
I think so, yes, because I don't know what it is about the especially the American portion. It just has a how do you call this, manifest destiny kind of mentality.
Yeah,
because they want more resources, they want more whatever it is they're seeking, and since they can't get it at home, there's fresh meats overseas that they can get it from, and they always aim where it's easy to get. So I want to give one example. For example, if it's very common where in America, if an Afro Saxon does something wrong, if you call him out on it, he'll just call you racist automatically, even if it's not true. For example, when Douglas Kim said you were racist because you didn't like rap music.
Correct.
I hate rap music. I don't listen to it. And but if someone makes that opinion, they'll just say, "Oh, you're racist. You're this, you're that." Has nothing to do with race. It's just for whatever reason, right? So
I'm
with
pretty
that,
sure. Sorry, I'm pretty
go ahead.
sure there are lots of people in Africa who don't like rap music either, right?
Oh yeah. Plus, there's rap in many other countries, and they Afro Saxons don't have a monopoly on this genre of music, so it's silly. But the point is, for someone like me, if I try to call them out, if I say this is wrong, this is not okay, they call me self-hating, you're whitewashed, you're brainwashed, you're this, you're that. So I'm pretty much powerless because they can just dismiss me and say whatever they want. So if they were to go to, let's just pick a random country, Nigeria, for example, just a random country. They say, let's go to Nigeria because they have a fantasy mind and thinking that they're magically going to just assimilate and everything's going to be okay. But they have a Western view of what Nigeria is like versus what Nigeria is like in Nigeria. So they're going to go there thinking that Nigerians are like Afro Saxons. And then when they go there, they see how they live so different. They're going to say, no, we're going to make it better. We're going to, by their standard, by Western standard. And then the locals are going to say, no, 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 this is how we've always been doing it, and we're going to keep it this way. So there's going to be a rift.
Yes.
So then they're going to get angry. They're going to be bitter and like that comedy.
Yeah, that comedian who was saying that he felt that, you know, we're all black. How come they treat me so like just another American when I go back to Nigeria?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I imagine the Asian Americans would come back and they would find that not everybody is some stem-ways model minority type, you know, and then they would feel frustrated because they can't click with local Asians, and they would, because nobody has the same degree of, no Asian in Asia has the same degree of contempt. Even Asian reactionaries do not have the same degree of contempt that some of these model minority Asian Americans have for the arts or humanities. And Asian Americans are particularly reactionary. They're just like the most reactionary members of society. So when they come back, they'll find that they only click with the most reactionary members, right? And they will find they'll feel frustrated eventually because not everyone is as intolerant, and well, I don't want to say all Asian Americans, but you know, then they will try like your friends. I mean, not your friends, your the people you mentioned who go back to Africa. They will try to change things to be more
exactly. Exactly. But this happens quite commonly with a lot of Afro Saxons, for example, because in America, a lot of them have this mentality. They have this Pan-Africanist kind of thinking that, you know, they'll fly on the plane and they'll be welcomed and they're all the same thing. But then they get disappointed because the locals would look at me and they would say, what tribe are you from? What language you speak? You know, what would they would say, like, what's your great grandfather's last name or whatever? These things are very important in their culture. These things don't exist in America, right? So they're looking at them like clowns. Like, look at these people thinking that they're local like us. And then the Afro Saxons, they get extremely bitter about it. So rather than just accept it as it is and just say, you know, just try to what's the word I'm looking for?
Adapt and
adapt or
compromise, maybe.
That's the word I'm looking for. Compromise. Instead of compromising, they say no, it has to be my way for some reason.
Yeah.
So they want to build their own. They build their own cliques.
Yeah.
And they build their own communities. They keep the money to themselves. And well, first they try to, I guess, like you said, they gentrify, they do different things to try to get the locals interested, but the locals are not interested because the locals have different values, they have different dreams and different minds. So then they get angry and they say, oh, you know what, we'll just keep it to ourselves. And they start mistreating the locals and they start getting bitter and they start saying, oh, look at the way they do this, look at the way they do that. And then that's when their Anglo-Saxons comes out of their manifest destiny mentality comes out. Then they start realizing, wait a minute, I do have more in common with white Americans, Asian Americans, et cetera, et cetera.
Finally.
Finally, yeah. And then I guess because they realize they live much better in Africa because the locals are very poor, the dollar is more powerful, et cetera, then they, you know, I guess then the bad news were for example, you remember how you said Israel was meant to be like a satellite state?
Israel, that's right. It's a satellite state of the European countries.
Yeah. So then they're going to become the satellites of Africa.
Yeah. You know, the thing is that the same can be said about, you know, Israel. You know, what was it I was saying, that the Jewish people, the Zionists who go back from Europe to the Middle East, now they might say they're Jewish. Take someone like Ben Shapiro, but at the same time, he's the one who lauds the supremacy of Western civilization, which is funny because Jewish is not Western. Jewish is Middle Eastern, right?
It's Eastern.
Right. So these people go back, and then they form the only Western country in the Middle East, Israel. And people like Theodor Herzl, for example, I think if you read his writings, he had a certain colonial mindset, right? A certain Anglo-Saxon mindset, because he was from Austria, right? You know, I think Jewish people and Arab people lived together for centuries with no problems, right? The problems only started when, well, some European Jewish people decided to move back to Palestine. I think that maybe instead of expecting the diaspora to return to the motherland, which is impossible, the new countries that they've moved to should treat them better rather than dumping them on the motherland. Because, you know, Arthur Balfour, the guy who signed the Balfour Declaration, the British guy, he hated Jews, and yet he also supported a Jewish state in Palestine, right? So to me, it seems that Zionism is also a positive force for anti-Semites in the West, because then the Jews get to leave Europe, they go back to Palestine, they can fight it out with the local people. But I don't even think that someone like Herzl would click culturally with a traditional Jew, right? Do you think so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah, and he's like,
it's two totally different cultures, and that's like one day I had kind of, well, not a debate, but I had a taxi one time when I was in New York, and the taxi person was, I guess he said he was from Ghana, right? So he asked me, where am I from? So I immediately knew he meant like, where am I from?
Which tribe?
By heritage. Yeah, like by tribe. I just said, I'm from here, I'm from New York. But he said, no, but where are you really from? As in, like, what tribe? I said, I don't know. And I said, if you lived here long enough, you would know that most people born here don't know their own history, including European Americans, for example. You know, it's not something we pay attention to. So we were talking a little bit, and then I kind of got him to express what his intentions were, because what happens is when I talk to some people and I say, oh, I travel to Asia, because Asia is my favorite part of the world. It's my favorite continent. I have friends there. I speak the language, blah, blah, blah. And the immediate reaction is, why not go to Africa? And I'm like, why would I want to go to Africa? What? I have nothing against Africa. Nothing against Africa. It's not a problem. I don't have any issues with the people. But for me, like you said, you know, my immediate ancestors were 300, 400 years in America already. So we're culturally, you know, Anglo-Saxon, like Europeans. Most of us don't know our tribe, where we came from, what country we came from. We don't know the countries on the continent of Africa or anything. We don't know anything about it. So how could I be African? Never been there. But someone like Elon Musk or someone who's from Morocco or Algeria, how come you don't mention them when it comes to Pan-Africanism? Why do you only seek me out because I look like you? He gets, oh, well, you know, you should know your heritage. I said, well, my heritage is here. Well, I was talking to him. I said, well, my heritage is here, meaning in New York, because all of my family most likely came from the South, and we have culture and history there. We acknowledge we have African ancestry, but that's a long time ago. We're only concerned about what we have here and now. So I asked him, I said, so if I were to go to Africa, how would the locals treat me? And he gave a kind of like a romanticized scenario. Oh, they'll be kind to you, they'll be nice. I said, but that's not specific to people from Ghana. He was mentioning Ghana. I said, but there's kind people everywhere. There's
Yes.
kind people in Russia. There's kind people everywhere. You could probably meet them in Afghanistan or some other place. And I said, well, for one, if I show up in Africa, they're going to see me as a foreigner because I'm not from their tribe. I don't speak their language. My mannerisms is different. How I dress is different. My hobbies and interests is different. How could they say that I'm with them when I'm just the only thing we have in common is, like you said, the hardware, but the software is totally different.
Yes.
So imagine, let's put it like this. Let's say I have a friend, he's American. He moves to, let's say, Chile, has a child. The child speaks Spanish only, grew up Chilean. Then he comes to visit America. I'm going to see him as a foreigner.
Makes sense.
Not American. He has American father, but this person is a foreigner.
Right. Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense that just because I happen to share the same DNA as you, that automatically I'm African. When there's actual people like Elon Musk and all the Moroccans, Algerians, all of these people are actually from Africa.
Yeah.
How am I African? How am I more African than they are?
They don't see it that way. They only see race. That's the whole thing.
They're too obsessed with race, and eventually you can gauge that it's kind of a nationalistic kind of thing.
And I feel that some Chinese Americans, like Xiang Yu, for example, are even more nationalistic to China than Chinese themselves, you know? Like, you remember the tweet that he made about how, you know, it doesn't matter where you're from, you have a duty to seek out your ancestral roots, right? He was actually meaning it to the Malaysian Chinese, some of whom don't even speak Mandarin, right? Who, well, depends on which wave of migration you're looking at. If you're looking at the first wave, the Peranakan, we came 400 or 500 years ago. How relevant is China to us by this point? If our ancestors, our sailorman ancestors came over here 500 years ago, I mean, there is some relevance, but it's not. Of course, we assimilated to local culture. We ended up speaking Malay instead of whatever Chinese dialect the sailorman practice, right? Some Peranakans do speak Hokkien, not all. And the second wave, of course, is after the Opium War. That's when China was thrust into poverty. But it's been over 100 years. By this point, the Chinese here consider themselves Malaysian, right? We don't we don't hate China. I don't know why they hate China just because we're not interested in identifying.
Just like I don't hate Africa just because I'm not interested.
We're in the same boat. Sorry.
Exactly the same boat. But I wanted to mention one thing. I see there's a logical error, loophole, like, because China is not one homogeneous country. There's like over 50 something people, right? And not everybody speaks Mandarin in China. Some people speak totally different dialects. Some people speak languages that's not even Chinese.
Russian.
You have Mongolians.
Yeah.
You have Koreans. You have I don't know if I'm pronouncing their names. The Uyghurs. You have in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, they're called Dugans, but they're a different name in China. I don't remember. So are they also expected to speak Chinese? Because technically they're kind of like they're from China, technically.
Mandarin is actually a northern dialect that was brought over from it's not actually native to China in the sense that it only became the lingua franca in 1912, to unite everybody. That's what Sun Yat-sen did. But I feel that, when migration constantly happens throughout human history, and sometimes elements of the old culture get lost and replaced with the new culture, like the Peranakan, the fusion of Malay and Chinese culture. But that's not how these Asian Americans see it. They say, you are still Chinese. You are not, there's no such thing as a Peranakan. You are Chinese. Like, what
Let me jump in real quick. They have this one drop rule mentality, it seems. So because even if you have other ethnicities within your blood, because you have that 1% Chinese, you're Chinese.
Eileen Gu comes to mind.
Because it used to be this way in America, and in before, where even if you're mixed with Irish, Cherokee, etc., and they had this concept like one drop rule. So if you're like 1-2% black, you're black. That's it. And I think there's a lot of elements from American history that they're trying to display to people in Asia, for example. I think that's their problem. They're looking at it from a American perspective.
They are
American view, but they're pushing it on to Asia
they
and Africa, I should say.
They don't understand the material conditions or the culture of other countries, but they apply their American consciousness on every part of the world, right?
Yeah.
Because many of my Peranakan friends only speak English and Malay, and they don't consider themselves to be culturally devoid. It's not like they're thinking, oh no, I don't have any culture. I need to get in touch with my Chinese heritage. The culture is Peranakan, right? It's like I've got pottery back, out when I'll show you when I'm out of the studio back at home. We've got pottery, and we've got paintings like of my great grandparents. They go back hundreds of years, right? So of course I have a culture. It's not the culture, the Chinese culture from China. It's not. It's of Malaysia, but they don't.
I want to give you another example. You know where the Caribbean islands are, right? Like Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, all those Caribbean cultures.
Yeah.
There's a large African diaspora in those islands there. And you can also say the Afro-Latino community. There's a lot of African diaspora in Brazil and parts of South America, right? Those people don't say, I'm African, I'm Ghanaian, I'm Nigerian. They say, I'm Jamaican, I'm Trinidadian, I'm Mexican, Afro-Mexican, I'm Brazilian, etc., right? They identify with the culture they're currently in, that they grew up in, right? They know that their ancestry comes from somewhere in Africa, but that's it. That's all it is. They say, yes, I have African cultural influence, but my place is Brazil, Jamaica, Trinidad, etc. They don't say they don't try to push this idea that we have to go back.
Yeah, I think it's partly these Asian Americans and African Americans are projecting their own unhappiness onto people in other countries, because they would assume that Chinese Malaysians are just as unhappy as they are, right?
As they are, yeah.
Oh, we've got less than
we have less than 1 minute. Yeah.
I'm gonna start another meeting, bro. I'm just gonna stop this and how do I? Okay, well, I'm just gonna.
You're gonna send me the link.
Yeah, we'll. Okay, we're back. Sorry about the interruption. Zoom is such an unreliable platform. They expect you to pay for to go past 40 minutes meetings. Yeah. As I said, some of these African Americans and Asian Americans are projecting their own unhappiness onto other people around the world, and they would assume that Malaysian Chinese are just as unhappy in Malaysia as Chinese Americans are as unhappy in America, right? But that's not true. I mean, yes, there is certainly, institutionalized discrimination against non-Malays, but on an individual basis, Malay people are actually really nice and really tolerant and really accepting. However, there is a certain minority of Malaysian Chinese reactionaries, and I've made it very, very clear that there's such a minority who believe that our ancestral land is China, and if you're a Chinese who doesn't speak Chinese and has no intention of learning Chinese, you are some self-hating banana because you are Chinese first, Malaysian second, right? Just like the Malay reactionaries who say that you're Malay first, Malaysian second, right? So unfortunately, these blood and soil people who call me a self-hating whitewashed banana, because I say, look, I'm Peranakan, I consider myself Malaysian, not Chinese, right? Primarily, I'm Malaysian first, Chinese second. Well, when I call those people out and I say that these people are idiots, Douglas Kim and these other Asian Americans go like, oh, you see, he's so self-hating and whitewashed. he hates other Chinese people who speak Chinese, you know, like that's not the case. I have no problem getting along with a regular Malaysian Chinese who may or may not speak Chinese, but doesn't call me a self-hating banana, because I've no emotional connection to China, and I've no emotional connection to Mandarin or Hokkien or Cantonese, because I consider Malay to be my mother tongue, right?
Yeah.
So you know, that's the thing. Could you yeah.
I need to say something. Do you notice how, as you said before, fascists are all, I guess, if these people put all their differences aside and these fascists came together, they're almost exactly the same. Because if you said, for example, like in America, if I said this minority of Afro Saxons are XYZ because they're exactly the same. They say our ancestral homeland is Africa. They don't say which part of Africa. They just say Africa. They don't say Nigeria or whatever, because many of us are probably from different parts of Africa. And plus, I guess I couldn't say they're Afro Saxons, but you have recent African immigrants who don't believe or agree with this. They will call you racist. They will call you anti-African. They will call you all sorts of names. And for example, if you and I, because you and I are not Jewish, if we say something against what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians, we will be called anti-Semites.
Exactly.
Do you notice this pattern?
But you know, I've always noticed this. Yeah, that's an excellent observation, my friend. You know, if we say something about what the Israelis are doing, we will be called anti-Semites. But if a Jewish person like Norman Finkelstein says it, well, they'll say he's a capo. He's a Jewish collaborator with the Nazis. Oh, you know, you just can't win. You can't win with these people. You know, like
or if you have like a white person or European Anglo-Saxon person who calls out what another colonizer is doing or another imperialist nation is doing, they'll say, "Oh, he's suffering from white guilt. He should be proud of his heritage."
White you know, Haas was saying that to Jason on Rohe. He was like, "You have white guilt, bro. I'm Muslim. I'm Arab. I don't have white guilt." Because Jason and Ruhe was going on about decolonization, right? And he's going on about land back. But as you know, these MAGA communists don't believe in land back, because they fundamentally believe in the American dream, right? What is the American dream? What do they mean by that? The American dream.
They want the 1950s style, house, a big house, a car, the white picket fence, 2 kids, 2 or more kids, depending on your background. Women in the kitchen, LGBT in the closet, Asians, Afro Saxons, everyone else should know their place, and they are the ones on top. They control and tell people how to live, and so on and so forth. We all have to worship their religion, their Romanized Christian religion. This is ultimately what they want. They have a romanticized Disney movie dream of what the 1950s is, and anything that threatens that narrative, anything that threatens this bubble, this idea that they're trying to preserve, they are going to attack you like it's nobody's business.
And the 1950s were, in fact, a terrible time for most people. Certainly, it was a terrible time for the global South, and the white middle class of the 1950s could live that lifestyle because they were doing it on the backs of the global South. And even then, even for women, for ethnic minorities, it was a terrible time. If you were a white middle-class Christian man like Don Draper, I guess it was good time, right?
Yeah.
For most people, I think it was
but it has expanded, because back then you had to be white, Christian, male,
Mm.
Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, etc. But technically, these days, it's expanded to everyone who's like, some women have this, reactionary women have this dream.
Mm.
Homosexuals, like Dave Rubin is his name, have
Dave
this
Rubin,
dream.
yes, he's basically, you know, Ben Shapiro's good friend, and Ben Shapiro hates gays. I mean, he himself said that he would not attend his wedding, right? Didn't he, Ben Shapiro?
Yeah, he said that. Uh, all the religious Muslim, everybody has this same dream where they want the 1950s for themselves. So
Right.
the whole thing is expanded even bigger.
Yeah.
So before, it was only a smaller minority of people who benefited. So, but now you have a bigger enemy force who believes in the same thing.
Right.
So they're all on board. The problem is, the minority group, they have their own kind of version. So for the Afro Saxons, they want Wakanda.
Mm.
For Asian Americans, they want a Singapore 2.0 or a new
Ugh.
Singapore.
Yeah.
For another group, it could be something else. So even though they may hate the mainstream society, they stand together in this dream that they're trying to chase, this 1950s dream. And that's why I believe, yeah, the MAGA communists and all these other supposed socialists are not really socialists, are not really communists. They're everything but in name.
I guess they're using the names communist to sound hip and trendy and to appeal to young people, because that's what young people like, right? Socialism is getting more and more popular with young people, and they're beginning to see through the bullshit of previous generations' propaganda, right?
I also think too, it's because in America, it's kind of like, it's such a dirty word. It's like scary. If someone says they're a communist, you automatically have horrible image about that person.
Mm.
And to come out as a communist in America, that's like social death sentence.
Mm.
It's that bad, because you can be an open communist, but if you were to actually make changes and actually start changing things, then you have to run out of the country and hide, because the government is going to come after you.
Absolutely. You know what happened to Oppenheimer, right? He wasn't even a communist, but he was a respectably progressive man, you know. I mean, more progressive than average. And
You don't even have to be an actual communist. I remember reading where all they had to do when they were persecuting communists, all they had to do was just accuse you of being a communist.
And that's what Lee Kuan Yew did, actually, to his political rivals. You heard of the Cold Store? He had a guy, Chia Tai-po, even locked up for like 32 years, you know. It was a horrible time for these people. Like, yeah,
exactly. So
yeah. Basically, Lee Kuan Yew basically squashed the whole left in Singapore. So there's no left wing left in Singapore, unfortunately. But the funny thing is, a lot of liberals in this country actually like him a lot. I guess because he didn't hate gay people, and you know, I guess because gay people didn't get in his way, right? And the funny thing is that liberals will also in this country, as I've said, they've been deafeningly silent on the Israel and Palestine issue. How could anyone not notice? They were very noisy when it came to religious freedom, which is fair enough, religious freedom for Malays or rights for women, But when it comes to Palestine, they're deafeningly silent, liberals in Malaysia. And I guess deep down, they probably view Israel as the woke country, because Israel, you know, they let everybody join the army, man, woman, LGBT, everybody has equal opportunity to murder Palestinians, right? So
also I want to add to that. I think this was the same when it came to the Ukrainian war, the recent Ukrainian war, because Russia is also quite conservative in terms of like
values and traditions.
Yeah, gay rights and women. Well, women have rights too, and I remember reading they were trying to make Ukraine more like West. I don't want to say
More
like more
civilized
progressive,
in a sense.
more civilized. So because of this, people all over the world were Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. They were crying about it. They were all in your face about it. You couldn't say anything. And but now that it's Palestinians, now they've been dehumanized to
Yeah.
the point that, like you had on your other post, children are getting killed by the dozens every single day, and it seems
15
nobody
minutes.
cares.
Every 15
Yeah.
minutes, a child dies, and the thing is, these children, I'm afraid some people may even view them in the same way they view these Hamas, anti-Semitic Hamas terrorists. They don't make a distinction between them, like I'm afraid that this is where the liberal blind spot comes up, because they see Hamas and they think, oh, this represents all Palestinians. And Hamas, in fact, was actually financed by Israel for many years. In fact, Netanyahu himself said, as I said in my latest video, he said, if we are to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state, Hamas needs to be supported. We need to transfer funds into Gaza, right? Because they make it difficult for a Palestinian state, because nobody wants to sympathize with the Palestinians if they associate the Palestinians with Hamas, right?
Yeah.
So Hamas itself is a monster that Israel helped to create. Yeah. So
yeah, exactly.
It's hypocritical.
And but and then also you see the change in tone as well when remember we talked about how like Ben Shapiro, I think, was one of them, where they told the citizens of Gaza to go to the south, right?
Right. And then
everybody was saying, "Oh, you see, they're good people because they told them to run." And then when they went south, they were getting bombed.
Yes, they did it on purpose because they wanted.
They did it on purpose.
Get
But they never admit when they're wrong. Is what I'm saying. They never admit it. So I was reading on Twitter, well, X on Twitter, that I was reading post after post after post. Oh, they're good. They are humane because they told them to go south, and then they get bombed, and then they're silent.
But they
can't
don't
say
admit that they're wrong. That's the thing. They won't admit that they were wrong. No, they will never do that. They're too proud. They're too arrogant.
No.
And also, as Netanyahu says, the Israeli army gives themselves plausible deniability by saying that, look, we warned the Gazans to get out of the hospital. We told them you have 24 hours to evacuate, right? But if people are sick and dying, and how can they get out of the hospital, right? This is a death sentence, pretty much. So it's what they're doing is collectively punishing the Palestinians, basically. But I suspect that they already knew Hamas was coming. How could
I think so too, as well. Also, there was something I wanted to bring up as well in regards to the diaspora. So maybe I could be wrong and out of line for saying this, but it seems to me that a lot of the diaspora that come from global north countries, it's like they automatically support Israel.
Yes, I think you are not wrong in that regard, because
most cases,
a lot of the English-speaking liberals in this country who are, understandably frustrated with the Malaysian politics and are frustrated with the austere version of Islam in our country, they automatically support Israel, even if they don't say it openly. Because they think Israel are the good guys,
I want to also add, I've been watching some YouTube channels of, Afro Saxon diaspora, and a lot of them don't care about the Palestinians.
No, they don't.
And the reason, there's different reasons, but one of the reasons is they feel that because they feel that they're not getting enough sympathy from the American mainstream.
Right.
So they're saying, oh, well, we suffer from race, which they do.
They do
suffer from racism,
They do.
but they're making it like they suffer from racism, so we don't care about their issues. They don't care, even though they do have it bad, but they're not getting bombed every day in the streets of America.
Yeah.
They're not getting killed every day for being a different religion or something, like in Gaza,
Race.
for example.
I mean, yes, they do have it bad, and very similarly, some of the non-Malays in this country, not all, but some of the English-speaking ones say that, well, you know, how charity begins at home. You know, like the Chinese and the Indians are experiencing apartheid practices.
Same thing.
Same thing. Yeah, it's I think yes. I mean, it's unfair that, you know, poor Chinese and Indians are suffering because of the affirmative action policies. But this is like comparing apples and oranges, because affirmative action is not the same as like getting bombs rained on your head. And it's, you know, liberals, as I said, have been deafeningly silent on the Gaza issue, because when you bring it up, they'll say, what about in Malaysia? You know, the ethnic minorities, Chinese and the Indians, are suffering from apartheid policies. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, and I would even also tell them that because you know how some of them want to go to like Australia, America, Canada.
They do.
I would say Malaysia is probably one of the best places where they could be, because even in America, a lot of elderly Chinese or Asian American elderlies are getting beat up, pushed in the subway, shot, stabbed.
You don't see this in Malaysia, you know. You just don't see this happening.
You hear this very often in America or in the Western countries in general.
So they act like Malaysia.
They want to come, but they want to go there.
They want to go there. Because
they want to go there.
Yeah, they actually want to go there to escape racism in Malaysia, right? But this is like the Diet Coke version of racism. Whereas like in America, you are getting the full-on version of racism. Does it make sense? I mean, it doesn't make sense. But I mean, they should try and fix the country, because race-based politics are meant to divide the people, right? So instead of trying to fix our own home, they want to go to America and experience the real well, also, you know, sometimes, like we said, sometimes migrants from Malaysia or any other global south country, when they move to the global north country, they pretend that everything is all rosy. They tell people back home that everything's perfect and they don't tell the truth.
Straight up lies.
Life is actually harder.
But here's the thing that I really hate. I hate when they do this, right? Because I seen this in Kazakhstan when I was living there for a while. It's when, if, for example, let's say, okay, in Kazakhstan, Kazakhs treat each other very poorly. So if one Kazakh person does something bad or does something, the other Kazakh will say, oh, you see, oh, I can't stand it here, this happened, and they'll say a whole bunch of stuff. But if they go to America or another global northern country, and the guy, his boss, whoever, could beat them up, say most horrible things to them right to their face. Oh, this place is so wonderful. Oh, it's not that bad. It's just that one person. It's complete garbage.
Yeah.
I hate when they do that.
I hate it too. It's like they could experience worse kind of treatment, worse treatment over there, but then they pretend as if they just turn a blind eye to it. But back in their own countries, their own homeland, if somebody just gives them a bit of microaggression or something, then oh, this is the most racist country in the world. That's why
I'll give you one example. One day, I couldn't read Russian at the time. I couldn't read Russian at all. Now I can't, but back then I couldn't, and I needed help to buy something. I think I needed soap or something like that. So I asked my friend, could he help me find a particular brand of soap, because I needed to wash some clothes or something. And for the washing machine to work, you needed a certain brand. So he came with me, and some shops in Kazakhstan, they have security, and they follow you around the shop. That's their job. It's not that they don't like you or don't trust you. That's just their job. They have to do it. So we go in, and he asked the store owner, "Where's this laundry soap?" And they said it's back there. So we go there, and the guy starts following us. So he gets angry. He's like, "Oh, you see this? This is racism. Why is he following me around?" And blah blah blah. And I said, "That's probably because he has to." That same person went to America, and he tells me all kinds of things, how they're always checking him. They're telling him check his pockets. They're telling him they're doing XYZ to him. But then he's saying, "Oh, but it's okay, it's all right, it's normal, and everybody gets checked around." But I said, "But you wasn't saying that in Kazakhstan with that one guy." So it's the difference.
I think they have much higher standards for their own people, in the sense that they have higher standards. I mean, they have impossible standards for their own countries,
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, it's kind of like the people who think that Malaysia is the most racist country in the world probably have not lived in a Western country long enough to experience the real version of racism. I mean, they say that, of course, there's this racial institutionalized racism in Malaysia, right, against the Chinese and the Indians, and the Western countries are more fair. But my brother himself, when he graduated from dentistry, he got higher scores than his classmates who were Australian, white Australian. They found it much easier to get jobs than he did. In fact, it was an Indian migrant who gave him a job, an Indian migrant dentist who gave him a job, right? So, the funny thing is that these people who say that there's racism in Malaysia because the Malays don't give the non-Malays a chance, it's the same in Australia. I mean, they would prefer to hire, they don't say it openly. It's not stated like in the Constitution of Malaysia that of Malay supremacy, or the Constitution goes like Ketuanan Melayu, which means Malay, there's a special position for the Malays, right? Because as you know, the Malays were the poorest group after independence, right? So they had to sort of like basically do things to ensure that they were they would not be left behind by the Chinese, because the Chinese and Indians, they had already a lot of experience with capitalism. While the Malays were transferred, they were going from feudalism straight to capitalism straight away. But that's not the same. I mean, even in Australia or America, people still hire based on race. I mean, it's not something that they say openly, but it still happens, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that sometimes people don't realize that Malaysia is a good country. I mean, we're decent.
But the thing is, those people, those liberals you're talking about, are very dangerous people, because let's say I know better because I've been all around Asia, so I already know. But let's say somebody was traveling to Malaysia for the first time and they don't know anything about Malaysia. They come to Malaysia, and naturally they're going to get dragged into. Okay, I'm sorry. These liberals are going to be more attracted to these Westerners by the fact that they speak English, and they understand Western mentality a little bit more. They will straight out lie to that Westerner and say all kinds of bad things about Malaysia, and then that Westerner is going to think, "Oh, Malaysia's terrible, I'm leaving."
Yeah, the liberals are trying to speak up as the representatives of Malaysia. And unfortunately, they bump the bubble type.
This happened to me in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Republic of Georgia, and I think another country, I don't remember, where you had one of those representatives of that country try to scare me and say, "These people are super duper horribly racist to you. They're going to do this, they're going to do that." But it was garbage, because I lived, for example, in Kazakhstan, I lived there 3 years already, and I had no such experience. But they actually think they're going to try to convince me over my 3 years of experience in Kazakhstan that it's a terrible, horrible country and should never live there. But it's complete garbage, because how can you tell someone else's experience just because you had a bad experience? And you're going to spread a lot of Western rumors and lies about a particular group of people. just because you yourself don't like that particular class, is what I mean.
And I think there is a certain sense of elitism among English-speaking bourgeois liberals in all these countries, right? They view their village counterparts as being backward, backward savages. I think Mariam Mokhtar comes to mind. I've shown you a couple of Mariam Mokhtar's articles, right? Now, she has good intentions, no doubt. She was very fair to Jinping, which is good. I mean, but I feel that she often bashes down on her own race, being an enlightened liberal Malay. Like when she said, for example, there's no such thing as a moderate Malay, for example. They're all like reactionary, and basically the Malays need to change their mindset and all that.
So let me ask you a question. Have you ever experienced, well, not experienced, but seen where, for example, because you said you worked in a school, international school, was it?
Yeah, I have.
Where you had, let's say, a Western guy does something wrong, he's forgiven automatically. But if, let's say, a Chinese or Malay or Indian person does the same thing wrong, they'll say, oh, that's so typical of these people here.
Do you remember the expat that I mentioned to you? Let's not mention his name openly, but the American chap with the Malay wife. Right. This guy was very arrogant. He would openly say very demeaning things to Arab students. He hated Arab men, not so much Arab women. He was very much like Bill Maher, if you can imagine, right? Do you know Bill Maher? Of course you know Bill Maher.
Yeah, I know.
He's very much like Bill Maher, if you can imagine. And he was here only because he was teaching, only because he was waiting for his wife's green card, right? Oh, 10 minutes. Anyway, this guy, he would say, behind closed doors, he would say things like, as you know, working hard is not a part of their culture. Work is for women and slaves. That he would say shit like that. And he used to keep getting complaints from the Arab male students, but the thing is, if it had been a Malay or Indian or Chinese teacher who did that, they would have been sacked, right? They kept him for years because he's a white guy, right? And he would have been fine if there were no Arab male students. He would have been, because he was respectful to every other student except Arab males. He seemed to have a bee in his bonnet about Arab men for some reason. And I've noticed that sometimes, people think that it's just cultural differences when expats demonstrate certain problematic behaviors, but then it's not. They can hide behind like cultural differences, just being open and expressive about their views. And he hated it when we were speaking Malay in the office because he thought we were talking about him. So he went to the academic director and he said, this being an English school, we should set a good example for our students. So everyone ought to speak English. And so she encouraged us to speak English, not Malay. He didn't like that.
That's weird.
Yeah, so he's in Malaysia. He lived here for years, but he still didn't learn Malay. He was and he didn't have a single Malay friend besides his wife, because, he didn't trust Muslims, first of all. Yeah. He only wanted to mix with the Indians and Chinese. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also something I want to share that I also hate with other expats. Let's say I come to Malaysia, right? Let's say I'm getting along with the locals. And maybe I learned a little bit Malay, like how are you, whatever. Sometimes you will have other expats. I experienced this where it's like they get jealous of you or something.
Yeah.
Or they feel that you shouldn't be associating with those people for some reason. It's like you shouldn't be having fun with them because they're nothing, where I should be hanging out with the other expats because we're Americans or something like that. So back at home, we have a lot of tribalism where we don't talk to each other at all. So if I was to meet this person in the street, he wouldn't say anything to me. I wouldn't say anything to him. But now that we're overseas, suddenly now you're friends with me, we're best friends, and you want to hang out all the time, and I'm we're one. How come you don't do that back at home? What's with the two-facedness?
Well, I think, back home, you're if you pardon my language,
Yeah,
to them, you're just a black guy from the ghetto,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm not saying you're from, I'm not
Yeah,
saying
I understand.
that, but that's how they view that's how they view African Americans, right? Some of these,
But
when you go overseas, you're American,
yeah,
and they try to,
but I observed this. So in Malaysia, no, in America, I'm the low end of the stick. I'm the lower totem pole, right? In Malaysia, now I'm a little bit higher because they think the Malays are the lower in the totem pole, right? It's the same thing when it came to Asian issues in America. Now we're talking about the diaspora. They were the bottom of the totem pole with the Afro Saxons, right? But now they're trying to be two-faced. So now they have given Asian Americans the model minority kind of stereotype. So now they're trying to rift us apart.
That's right.
So instead of back in the 70s where the minorities were together, they were more connected. So when they were given this kind of stereotype that they're the model minorities, they believe in families, blah, 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 they did that to piss off the Afro Saxons, and then that's how this rift happened.
That's it.
So I notice everywhere they go, they try to
divide
make that
and conquer.
rift. Because when I go to Asia, when I go to Kazakhstan, Japan, wherever I go, I always try to mingle with the locals. That's the reason I came to this country, right?
Yeah.
Why would I fly all the way to half of the earth of the planet to talk to Americans? I can stay home and do that, right? I'm not going to go all the way out of my way to look for other expats and talking out with them. I can stay home for that. I came here because I'm curious about the locals, what they think, their history, their culture, whatever. And it's like they see that and they just have to police how we interact. So what they'll do is, and I've noticed this, they'll come to my face, they'll say they're racist, they don't like you. They'll go to, and then I go away, they'll talk to this group of people, they'll say, oh, he hates you, you shouldn't talk to him. So he tries to make himself the mediator between all the different groups, all the other nationalities. And I can't stand that.
It's not, if you read colonial literature as well, you'll find that they do play the races against each other. Or I can say that the colonizers also did the same thing. They would go to each race and do the same thing. They would be like a mediator, and
it just like in Malaysia,
yeah, that's why we have these liberals. Their memory only goes back to 1957, but they don't understand that the race tribalism and the race tensions have their origin in colonial times. They just say, don't blame the West for the problems we face today. That is not relevant anymore. What is relevant is now. We live in Malaysia. But the thing is that if you don't study the history, if you don't understand the history of colonialism in causing our racial tensions, then you cannot solve it, right? So these liberals are very frustrating to talk to sometimes because they don't want to blame West. They say we must, this is the problem with our leaders in Malaysia. It's not the West's fault. Well, who installed these leaders in the first place? Who installed these leaders, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
But that's probably another topic for another day. You probably know why Jinping was rebelling against the government of Malaysia, right? Because well, he did not like the fact that the West did grant us independence, but the leadership, the Asian leadership that followed people like Tunku Abdul Rahman and Lee Kuan Yew. Now, I'm not saying they're all bad. They did do good things, but they were Western trained, Cambridge trained technocrats, right? Who had a Western mindset. They had to be those people had to lead in order for the British to grant us freedom, not someone like Jinping, for example. So that's the condition, that the leaders, the post-colonial leadership had to be people that Britain approved of, you see. So Yeah, and
which is basically still colonialism.
pretty much they rule us by proxy. Yeah,
Basically.
yeah, and unfortunately, liberals just don't want to. They don't want to dig before 1957. Somehow they seem to not want to point fingers at the West for some reason, and maybe because they view the West as more progressive and enlightened and civilized.
Yeah. And then to the next point about the diasporas, I think that most of these diasporas who will go to their motherland, their ancestral land that they speak of, are fascist minded enough that they would be another Lee Kuan Yew in their ethno states, I believe. Because a lot of their if Thomas Sowell, Candace Owens, Douglas Kim, all these people were given that kind of power, they would be exactly like that in those states over there and wherever they're going to.
Do you want to do another meeting? Oh, we have less than a minute. Well, I guess you also have to go for lunch now, right? So I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll resume this in the next meeting, and well, I guess we'll wrap it up for now, bro. Because you know,
All right.
yeah. Well, it was great chatting with you, and
Yes, it was.
this is going to be a very we're gonna watch the fireworks go off after after we post this video. We're gonna piss off a lot of people with this.
A lot of people are being pissed off.
All right. Well, you have a great day, bro. And I will see you. I will see you when I see you. Take care, man. Goodbye.
Take care. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.